remember in Fairhaven, which somebody
Yes.
told me about, which is the town over from me, but I
wow.
couldn't attend. I was so bummed, but I'm hoping you'll come back, Hannah.
Yes, I'm going to Amsterdam and Spain this year, but hopefully I'll be coming back, come around again. Yeah.
What town are you in, Sarah?
I'm in South Dartmouth, Massachusetts.
Okay. Yeah. My mom is from Taunton. And so every summer I go to Massachusetts. I know. So when I saw that Hannah was in Fairhaven, I was like, oh my gosh, Fairhaven.
I know. That's what shocked me when somebody said, oh, Hannah's going to be in Fairhaven. I went, Fairhaven? That was unexpected. So they're all small towns along the coast here.
It's so funny to hear you say small world. Taunton.
Wow.
Because Taunton is a town in England very close to where I grew up. That was what was really entertaining for me being in New England, is seeing all these names of British, English towns and hearing them pronounced wrong.
Right. They weren't very original.
Right. I guess they were homesick. I don't know, maybe.
I don't
know. Yeah. So. Anyway, hi Javi. Let's see who else is here. Arnie. It's interesting. Hi Arnie. Let's see who else we've got here. Melissa.
Oh yeah, Melissa's from Las Vegas.
Oh wow, how nice.
Yeah.
I always think like Las Vegas and Jerusalem, where I live, are the kinds of places where people don't usually imagine people living. It's like you go visit Las Vegas, you go visit Jerusalem. Do people actually live there? So yes, we live there, right, Melissa? Yeah.
How long have you lived in Jerusalem?
Gosh, it's about 13 or 14 years, something between two. Yeah. Wow. I know, time's flying by. It's it's a beautiful place.
Yeah. Oh wow, I want to go.
Yeah, everybody come visit. Maybe we should do a retreat here.
Oh, we should. Yeah. That would be fun.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, Katrina. Let's see who else is here. People I know. I'm getting to meet some new people too.
Yeah. Well, now that it's 9, we can just get started. And so this will be on here for about an hour. And there will be room for you to raise your hand and ask questions out loud. But also, if you are more comfortable, type them in the chat and maybe we'll just kind of alternate. And I'm really excited that Hannah offered to do this webinar. I'm such a fan of hers. And ever since I read your Painless, and then I read your other book, The Myth of Low Self-Esteem, and then I joined the Painless Book Club because I was just so excited. And then we worked together individually. And for me, when I read Painless, I was more reading it. Oh, how could I help people dealing with health anxiety or maybe chronic pain? And the way that you write, I think I said this to you, makes me think of Sid Banks, where it's a story. And so it totally puts my intellect to sleep. So when I was reading Painless, and I know we're talking about very well, but getting to, I had all these insights and I wasn't expecting it. I was thinking, oh, how could I help other people? And that's such the gift of this conversation to me of the principles. I had all these insights about my own self and perfectionism and judgment. And it was really like a next step after kind of healing from anxiety to, oh, wait, here's this other layer. And it's been transformative for me to deal with pain that's come up or health conditions. And then I was so excited for this book, Very Well, and on hormones. And I remember it was like waiting till September. And then as books happen, it was a little bit later, but I was like, oh my gosh, here it is. And again, I was just blown away and such a good feeling reading it, because I love reading and I love nonfiction and fiction, but there's something about you write when it's a story. I get lost in the characters. And as I said, like, I think my intellect goes to sleep, which is really needed. And I had, again, insights, and I don't notice too big of an impact with cycles and hormones, but I do in a way that I feel like with my hormones, and I'll go through phases, and the past 6 months or more has definitely been, I'm in a very, very low mood right before my cycle. And I'm aware of it, as you know, which is one good thing, but taking things very personally and in a very sad, like low mood, that if I didn't have an understanding, I think I could get scared of it, but I don't take it seriously. But when I was reading very well, you know, and I'd read it every day just because it was fun. It wasn't like I'm going to study it, you know. And I was really shocked that I just forgot that I was even going to have my cycle. And my boyfriend, I didn't notice any change either. And I said, and he usually notices just subtle stuff. And we were both like, that. So I just felt, I love how much work, I imagine, goes into it, of all of the research, because it's so clear that you have such a deep understanding to me of whatever you're writing about, whether it's pain or hormones, but then such a beautiful gift of writing it so it doesn't sound like a science textbook. It's like perfect for, to me, like the intellect and the spirit. And I've had so many people that I've worked with. So for anybody that doesn't know me, I'm Lily, and I'm a 3 principles practitioner, and I specialize in helping people with anxiety and panic, because that was my biggest pain point, and what I struggled with the most. And so I feel very knowledgeable on that. But sometimes when I come and people ask me questions about hormones, it wasn't something that I felt confident about, just because I hadn't done a lot of research. And I know we've both had Dr. Pettit as our mentor. And so I would talk to him. And so I was just so excited for this resource, and so excited to have this conversation, because a lot of people say, well, what about hormones? And moods and anxiety? And so it's such a wonderful resource. I've been recommending it if anybody follows me on social media. And I know a lot of people that I'm connected with have been reading it and messaging me, and really excited to have you. And if you want to introduce yourself.
Wow, thank you so much. And you know what, you've just reminded me that my very, very first question to the first 3 principles teacher that I ever spoke to was about hormones. In fact, I'd completely forgotten that until you just said it, because I was just dealing with menopause. You know, I'd been through perimenopause for about 10, 12 years at that time when I found the 3 principles. And so that was really on my mind: brain fog, fatigue, hot flushes, the whole thing. It was quite unbearable. And I remembered I fell in love with the principles straight away. You know, I'd been coaching people for almost 30 years, and I just found the 3 principles were like a vocabulary for something I already kind of knew was there. I just didn't know how to articulate it. And like Sid's beautiful books and his talks and videos just kind of like articulated what I was really suspecting. So I remember I had a free session with Mark Howard, Dr. Mark Howard, if any of you know that name. He's in, I think in Berkeley or somewhere in Northern California, and the most sweetest, gentlest man. He's a PhD, I think he's a psychologist. And I was talking to him and I said, yeah, but what about hormones? You can't say hormones are thinking. And because that was what was on my mind at the time. And I remember he kind of went, He said, no, it's still your thoughts. I was like, how'd you work that out? You know, and I kind of forgotten about that, because it was like the first time I really saw, I started getting curious about how we experience everything. And I think what he said to me was something like, well, how would you know you're having a hot flush? How would you know that you've got brain fog? How would you know that you're tired? Right. And I'm like, well, because I feel it. I mean, I remember putting that conversation in the book. And he said, yeah, but that's coming to you via the gift of thought. And that really started my journey in understanding what thought, the principle of thought that Sid Banks was, talking about, what that really meant, and that it could show up as thinky thoughts like, do the laundry or, walk the dog, right? It can show up in those kind of thinky thoughts, but it can also show up as sensations and images and sounds. And it's how we experience everything, which I'd be very happy to talk more about that and go into more detail if that would be useful to anybody. But yeah, so that was kind of the beginning of my journey with the 3 principles. And not only did my chronic pain go away, I had 25 years of chronic pain that had followed me for, through all kinds of treatments and modalities and attempts to, I guess we'll just cope with it. And then it wasn't until I started writing this book that I realized my menopause symptoms had gone away too. And I can still get the occasional hot flush, or, I had one about an hour ago, and I'm like, it's no big deal anymore. It really isn't a big deal anymore. Whereas before, I remember thinking, I'll take whatever medication, because if it means breast cancer, I don't care, because I can't function anyway. I mean, that's kind of where I kind of got to, which I've since learned is not necessarily true. But there's a lot of misinformation, obviously, out there about all kinds of medications. And my goal is not to recommend medication or any kind of particular treatment or supplements or anything like that. My goal with the book was really to illustrate the fact that we all have innate well-being, and that, like pain, like anxiety, when we overreact to anything that's going on in our lives, it's going to make it worse. And so seeing that, I think that's why my pain went away and why my symptoms went away. Yeah.
Yes. I love how you talked about the hormone cycle for like the lifetime in a way of a woman, from the, and if you haven't read the book, I highly recommend getting it and reading it. It's wherever you are in your journey in life, because, but from the younger daughter who was having some, PMS, PMDD, to a woman going through perimenopause and then menopause, to then a new mom. I work with a lot of moms and new moms as well. And with that hormonal shift, and that was something for me, and also having a daughter who's 16, it was just, I kept being like, oh, I couldn't love it any more than I did this, it was just so beautiful how you see the change. And I remember Dr. Pettit telling me when he worked with a woman, and she had very severe mood changes around her cycle. And she had a kind of a prominent job where I can't remember whether she was in political stuff. I don't know. She had to do something where it was big. And there would be a couple days before she could not work, because her moods and her emotions she would be so overwrought with pain, but also with very weepy. And I mean, it was very, very big. And so she told Dr. Pettit this, but she didn't come to work with him for anything to do with that. But so they'd been talking, and her understanding had been deepening. And she said, I have to tell you something. And that's when she brought it up. And she said, I've been able to work. And she hadn't had to take those 3 days off anymore. Just when her well-being rose, or her hormonal symptoms went away. And she said, sometimes there would be, she'd be in a little bit of a lower mood, and she'd kind of know not to take anything too seriously, or kind of maybe take it easy. But she went back to being not at the whim of, and they weren't so severe, and she was able to work. And so I think it was, I'm so excited. And I'm like, where should we start? Because you had said maybe it would be helpful to tell a little bit more, because somebody that I know that we are friends on social media, and she did ask me that very question about how is it thought? And you were the first person that introduced me to that, to actually really that type of understanding between thinking thoughts, and that we actually experience pain or hot flashes via our thought. And I was trying to explain it to her to the best of my understanding, but it is something that whenever we were talking during our sessions, that was something that you introduced me to it. And I still feel like I get it, but I don't get it. I don't know well enough to explain it as beautifully as you. And so if maybe we could start there and then open it up.
Yeah, for sure. So I can describe how the process of understanding it happened for me. It's probably the best way to give it some clarity. So when I was kind of new around the three principles, I remember hearing someone say, I think it was Michael Neal, actually, I think he posted in a group, that thinking was not the only thing you can do with the gift of thought. And I'm like, what? Right? Is there something else you can, like, are they doing something up in the mountains I don't know about? Like, what is there besides thinking? I mean, and my thinking just really speeded up. And so I think I messaged in that Facebook group, what did he mean? What is that about? And then a lot of people posted things like, well, it could be anxiety, or it could be creativity. The gift of thought is a spiritual energy. And how it shows up in our minds could be, all these different ways that thinking can show up. And that kind of worked for me for a while. I could see that, yeah, it can show up, in fact, I saw that all thought was neutral, and how I react to it is going to create anxiety. Or, I could have a creative thought, but if I'm in a bad mood, am I going to be able to make use of it? I started seeing it like that. And then as I started working with people with chronic pain, and I'm seeing the connection between stressful thinking and how the brain thinks we're in danger, and then it revs up the nervous system, and that's how chronic pain is produced. Some of my clients would say to me, yeah, I get that, but I wasn't thinking anything. And I'd be like, yeah, you probably were. It just became normal, and you just, got used to it. And I was almost trying to persuade them that they were thinking, and that they just weren't aware of it, which I still think is possibly true, but it wasn't helpful. So as a coach, I want to be helpful. So I started thinking, how could I make this easier to understand? So I started going back and listening to Sid Banks's talks. And when he talks about thought, he's talking about thought as a principle, one of the three principles. So when I make a capital T out of this version of thought, thought, the spiritual principle, is a creative energy. And at this point, I always start moving my hands around because it's really hard to come up with words for spiritual energy, and I imagine it's kind of flowing, it's kind of moving through. So as it flows through my personal mind, if you want, like my little screen of consciousness, it can take the form of thinky thoughts, like, I like chocolate, or do the laundry, or no, I don't want to. And sometimes there's a committee of voices. I don't know about you guys. I'm looking at a lot of diagnoses right now for another book, and I was reading one about hearing voices. I'm like, I hear voices. Does anybody else hear voices? I do. Right. So these voices, these words are going through our minds all the time. And they say we have about, 80 or 90,000 thoughts a day. And that's normal and natural. And they're constantly moving. That is the nature of thought. So then I started seeing that it can actually show up in different forms. So before it enters my mind, it's formless. And then as it comes into my little screen of consciousness, it can become a form. So what other forms could it take besides thinky thoughts? So the first one I came up with was images, because there are moments in all of our lives, in our day, when we have an image in our mind, but there might not be any words to go with it. Now, I had this really weird career in Hollywood long before I came around, was coaching full time. I did special effects, and directors and producers would come to me with really big movies, and they would ask me to make these weird and wonderful things, and I'd kind of go, yeah, okay, yeah, I can make that for you. So I'm picturing it in my mind. There aren't any words. I'm picturing how to make the monster or the wedding dress or whatever it is they were asking me to make, but I wasn't actually thinking anything, and I wasn't drawing anything. It was just all happening in my mind. Now, you could say that's a very specific talent, but you probably did it when you got dressed this morning, or when you make dinner tonight. I think I put these examples in the book, that when you're thinking about what to wear, you're probably imagining that top with that skirt, or those shoes, or if you're just going to the gym, you just need to put sneakers on. You don't need to draw a picture. You can picture it in your mind. In our mind's eye, we can see images. So after images, I suddenly started noticing that it was also sound. And when I spoke about this at the London conferences last year now, I put together a soundtrack, and I found the soundtrack for Jaws. Remember the movie Jaws, if you're over the age of 30, right? Dun, 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 right? That sound of, a shark in the water. Now, when I was doing a retreat in Massachusetts, like Jaws, the book is set not far from there. And one of the guys at the retreat said that it took him months to get back in the water after, I mean, I was talking about this in a conference in London, and people were going like, we're nowhere near any water. And yet that sound was evoking a reaction. We were feeling the thought showing up as a sound in that moment. And some sounds are scary, like the theme from Jaws. And then afterwards, I deliberately put the sound of a baby giggling. And I dare anybody not to laugh or smile when you hear a baby giggle, just to like, you know, raise the kind of good feeling back in the room, because after I'd scared everybody. So you can see how we're having an experience through sound when there's no words. And then I came to this idea that thought can also show up as sensations, because that's really what was relevant to my clients. So something like pain or dizziness or nausea is a sensation created by the brain, and it's not actually happening in the body. You know, this is research I went into with my other book, Painless, where I started to see that physical sensations are really, they're the ultimate special effect. You know, when I was doing special effects in Hollywood, you know, it was all about illusions. My career was about convincing you something was real that wasn't. And our brains do that all the time. And something like a physical sensation, whether it's your temperature changing or, you know, feeling just annoyed and frustrated, you know, like I remember when I was younger and I had my cycle that, you know, there would be a few days where I just want to rip your head off no matter what you'd done. And so I learned to start, you know, hiding in my room for a few days just to, you know, minimize damage. And that was, you know, that sensation, I could just feel it come over you. That was happening via the gift of thought. And the more I understood this, it started to take away the scariness of it. I was always terrified by my moods. I was always, you know, frightened that they would come and never leave. And quite honestly, I think I was in the mood for probably a good 10 years, you know, through my teens and my early 20s. But now I see all of those things, the sensations, the mood changes, the physical stuff, the sounds, they're all a blessing, because they're all a very clever system of letting me know where I'm holding in the quality of my thinking. So a lot of it is really a system of signals. You know, Bill Pettit, who Lily was referring to, he's famous for calling it love letters. Now, I've not quite had the nerve to sit across from someone who's in agonizing pain and say, "Oh, you're experiencing a love letter," because I think they would smack me. But I really do see it as a signal, you know. And so when, you know, we get sensations associated with our monthly cycle or after birth or in menopause, my body is going through some major changes, which are normal and natural. And that's my body and brain's way of letting me know that. And I found that the less that I react to it, the less the symptoms need to be. And then they can just move through, process, cycle, and we, you know, and I've had a lot of women tell me now that their symptoms have either melted away or become much less, or like Lily just said, you know, you can actually sometimes go through it and not feel anything at all. So I hope that explains it a little bit more.
Yes, it was so wonderful. And I'm going to keep what I share brief and we'll open it up. But right after the birth of my son, I have 2 kids, but I was definitely I wasn't in a great place mentally, you know, after I could see even before and during my pregnancy and then after. So it makes sense looking back. But when I first stepped out of the car, the first time I held him outside the hospital, I had a picture. It was an image that came to me of dropping him and his head splitting open. And it, you know, and it scared me so much. And that was kind of the start of some stuff. But it was when I work with people that have unwanted thoughts, intrusive thoughts. And a lot of times it's just images, or it's just like
Right.
Just kind of a movie that plays out, you know, in their mind. But and that is thought, you know, that is that, or yeah. And so maybe we'll open it up to anybody. If you want to raise your hand, if you're open to asking a question out loud, or if you have questions, type them in the chat and we'll start with Hannah answering them. And if there's something I can pop in. I know we have a question in the chat. Maggie said, slightly confused as wondering if hot flashes are a result of thinking.
It's a great question. I want to premise it with, I am not a doctor. So I just want to make that clear. I'm going to say no, because a hot flash is it's coming from a change in temperature in our body. Now, that is a normal and natural thing that happens, not just in menopause and perimenopause, but I know it can happen during pregnancy. You know, some women actually experience it during their monthly cycle as well. I wouldn't say it's a result of thinking, but I would say that if we have a stressful reaction to it, that additional thinking is going to make the experience much worse. And I don't know if this would be a good time to talk about the science in the book that I put in, because I think this kind of ties in here. The middle two chapters in the book are actually a transcription I did from a YouTube video I found, which sadly has been taken down, and I'm trying to track down the professor who gave the lecture to see if I can get a copy of it again. But basically, the professor, she's a professor of reproductive mood disorders at North Carolina University, and in the video she mainly talks about PMDD, which stands for premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is a very, very strong version of PMS. Like, women who have it are almost suicidal. It's a very very serious situation for the women who have that diagnosis. But she then later went on to explain this is also her explanation also applies to postpartum and to menopause. In that, what's often happening is, let's say you've got two women. One woman is having a very big reaction, lots of hot flushes, lots of moods, lots of intrusive thoughts, lots of bloating, or all kinds of things that can happen with hormone cycles. And then you've got a woman who's not having any reaction. So it's quite possible that their hormones are doing exactly the same thing. In fact, she said later on in a question and answer part of the lecture that there is no such thing as a hormonal imbalance. She actually said that some quack had made that up. That was her words, right? And she said American quack, and she is American. And she kind of suggested it was for people who want to sell programs and treatments and supplements to convince you that there's something wrong with you, and here's a remedy. So she was pointing out that for most women, whether you're having a very difficult time with those various hormonal cycles, or you're not having anything, it wasn't actually anything to do with hormone levels. And when I heard her say that, I thought it was fascinating. So she then shows a lot of research where she questioned the women who were having a more difficult time. And it became quite obvious to her that those women had a history of trauma, abuse, and some kind of prolonged stressful thinking and anxious anxiety diagnosis maybe, but even just prolonged stressful thinking. So that is a long answer to your question, but from that, what she started to see was a lot of the physical stuff was coming from a nervous system that was kind of trained to be hyperreactive. If you've been through a trauma, and we could talk about what trauma is, it's different for different people. It's a very subjective experience, because what one person can find traumatic, another person, might not even regard it as a trauma. But especially if it's happened early on, like in your childhood or in your teens, when we're still developing and our brains are still developing into our 20s, if we've had some kind of stressful experience, and it could even be growing up in a home that you are confused and don't understand, and our nervous systems can get hyperreactive in all kinds of situations, then the nervous system is almost trained to hyperreact. I could say overreact, but it doesn't sound so kind, but hyperreactive sounds a bit more polite, to situations. And then along comes a drop in hormones that's natural, like progesterone or after a birth. And the nervous system just goes, ah, you know, here's another trauma to deal with. And so the thing about our cycles, especially the monthly cycle, is that if you've had a really tough time last month, you know next month is coming, right? It's not like a fight with your sister or your boss where, you know, it might not happen again or it might not happen for a while. If you've just had a really horrible time with that cycle and then you know it's coming again, then women get very anticipatory and start getting very cautious and wary. Oh no, it's coming, it's coming. Can you see how like even my shoulders are going up as I'm describing it? And the nervous system is then revving up, and then we're going to feel terrible. And then we might get some thinking that's like, oh my gosh, it's not fair. My girlfriend has an easy time. My sister has an easier time. Why am I getting this? Why is this happening to me? I can't believe it. Doctors don't listen. Nobody understands. That thinking is creating a kind of reaction, but it's on top of the normal and natural reaction. So does that maybe, so it was a long answer, but maybe that answers your question, I hope.
That does. And I think Maggie's the one that asked it. And I think she has another question because you're raising your hand, Maggie. I know you had typed in the chat. I thought I could leave all of that in the past. But I don't know if you wanted to speak further, Maggie.
Am I unmuted? Or
yeah, I can hear it. I can hear you.
Sorry. I always get that button mixed up. Which way it is. Must be the menopause. Yeah, thank you, Anna. When I read the book, I was quite alarmed actually by reading some of that bit that you're referring to. I mean, to start with, I thought, oh well, that doesn't apply to me, and then I suddenly thought, actually, I think it probably does, and that sort of raised a whole different thing with the principles for me, because I've kind of that was over as far as I was concerned, really. I didn't even need to even give it a second thought, because I'm in innate well-being. It just was so irrelevant, feeling. And then suddenly I was sort of went back there. And so what I'm not absolutely sure about is, okay, it does make sense, but what do I do now? Because I thought that, in that sense, that there was no, in that sort of traditional sort of healing world or psychotherapy world or whatever it was, where, you look back on all these traumas in the past and all this kind of thing. As far as I was concerned, that was just a hiding to nothing, and it was just felt so irrelevant. And then now I'm thinking, well, is there something that I need to do, or does it still point to the same thing in the principles, just about chilling out, essentially? Does it still point to that? I was slightly alarmed to read it in a way. I'm sure that wasn't your intention, but
no, it certainly wasn't. But I'm not quite clear on what is alarming you. What is it that you're finding alarming?
Well, the thought that there's something wrong with me because I had that background, and I'm oversensitized, and I can never do anything about it because it's there. It's part of my biological makeup now.
Got it. Okay.
Whereas what I thought was, I'm fine. There's no issue. There's no problem. History, is just nothing. I mean, it was just a nothing. All that stuff.
Right.
And now it seems like a something.
No, my only intention of putting that information in the book was to, I guess, educate, in that a lot of women don't know that there could be a bigger picture. They think there's something malfunctioning with their hormones. I mean, I always felt like that as a teenager when I would have a rough time each month. I'm like, oh, my hormones are out of whack this month, or my hormones were malfunctioning somehow. I think there's a very common, strong idea in that women's bodies are, malfunctioning, going wrong, and that's why we're suffering. The connection with the trauma was, to me, it was actually good news, because as you're kind of pointing to, with an understanding of the principles, we know that trauma's in the past. It's not happening right now. I went through a lot of trauma in my 20s, a lot of violence. And for when I didn't understand that it was in the past, and I kept reliving it, that was what was revving up my nervous system. And in the lecture, she does say that even women with menopause who have not had any problem in their monthly cycle or with giving birth, and then suddenly along comes menopause and they, dive off the cliff into depression or anxiety, it could be because they're of this history of trauma. Now, if you don't understand what we've come to see through the principles, that would be bad news. That would be really scary. But we know that you have innate well-being. We know that any memory about a trauma that's, in the past is only being brought alive right here, right now through thinking. And when you understand that thinking is always moving, and it's just constantly flowing through our minds, and it's only an illusion when we get caught up in it. And when that illusion disappears, when you see through it, we're right back to our innate well-being. And so I've met women who've gone through horrendous things in their lives, and yet through this understanding are free of, not only free of the past, free of the trauma, but getting free of their symptoms too, because their nervous system is calming down when they see that they're safe. And I think safety is a very big one with anxiety and with a lot of these things that I started seeing. I'd spent a lot of my life not feeling safe. And it had nothing to do with my circumstances. I just was very, I didn't like people. I didn't like happy people. I didn't like, leaving my house, if I have to, right? And so all of that, which is pretty minor, but it's telling my brain that I'm not safe. So as I started to understand these ideas, and I started feeling safer in my environment, safer in my mind, my nervous system calmed down, and there was actually nothing to be concerned about anymore. And the more in the moment, or the moment, Sydney Banks called it isness, the more okay we are okay with what is, even a hot flush, if I'm okay with that hot flush, I'm not going to have such a bad reaction to it. And it's going to get more and more milder and melt away, and just really isn't an issue anymore. So I hope that helps, feel a bit safer. Yeah.
That was so helpful. And I know there was some comments. Christy had commented something, but then she said, it all makes sense now. So when you were talking,
yay!
making sense to her. And Lou has a question. And before I read that, I resonate with so much what you're saying. And for a lot of, I had, big T and little T trauma, and a lot of it was just that I felt unsafe too. And then I had so much going on trying to, fix myself when it came to anxiety. But for me, I also had an obsession with health, which I kind of got onto this very unhealthy obsession, like orthorexia, which was like health anxiety, OCD, but and I lost my cycle. So I stopped getting my cycle, and there was, weight wise, there was nothing, but also there was some other stuff going on, but like I kept trying more and more. And I would then think, oh, I need to eat in the, maybe how we did a long time ago with like fish eggs and raw milk and raw dairy. And I need to slow down on the exercise, and then it would just be a deeper dive. And I kept thinking, I need to like clear my home of toxins, and I need to be as healthy as I can be and get back to like our primal days, and meditation and mindfulness. And I would just do more and more. I think I need to do better and better. And then I'm going to do hypnosis. And I would do then like, put castor oil packs and rub my belly. I had someone come over and do like Mayan. And then I would then try, Western medicine and do a progesterone challenge and stuff. And this was before the birth of my second child, but right at the end, I got my hormones tested again, and I was actually in the postmenopausal range. So my hormones changed because of this severe, severe stress that I innocently put myself under. So I felt so unsafe because my thinking was revved up about mental and physical.
Yeah.
So it was such a gift. My body was like, no, it is not safe to have a child, but it was really interesting. So, but when I saw those test results, this was the first time that Google was kind of good, because I put everything in and I found a bunch of other women that, because I always caution people against Googling, but sometimes if you're kind of curious, I found these other women that had also become obsessed with kind of weight and body. Mine was health-wise, but I was able to, by doing way less. And this was before I found the principles. So the principles like just brought it to a deeper level, but my hormones got back to normal, but I had to honestly stop doing anything. And I had to just like chill out with the worrying about food. Like, honestly, once I ate like Foster Freeze, I would eat just like regular muffins. I just had to I needed to not read, not research, I got my period back and I knew it. It was very, I don't want to say too much, but it was actually like really interesting to, once it clicked, what I needed to do. Within just a few months, I got my period back, and then I got pregnant, and now my son is almost 9. But so our bodies are so resilient. And when I hadn't learned the principles then, so I was still kind of struggling with my mental health, but it was the same thing. And that's what I loved about the principles, was like, oh, I'm overcomplicating it, because it's when we think, and I think we put the wrong person in charge when it's our brain. When we can start embracing the thing that's actually doing life. And when I had read that, to me, I did understand it, of why some people might have a different experience with their cycles of other, but when you can understand it and then understand the principles and understand trauma and make peace with the, because Dr. Pettit said, in terms of, there's that book, The Body Keeps the Score. He said the body keeps the score for what we haven't come to peace with. And so I think, there's a way to not be like, oh, just push it away, not to dishonor, or, if we have experienced trauma. But I loved so much about how you wrote about your experiences, because they were really, I think in Painless and in The Myth of Low Self-Esteem, because a lot of people, it's so understandable, but they can kind of argue for their, to be like a victim, unintentionally. Well, this happened to me. How can you expect this? And there's no blame, or but when we can see how much hope and how resilient humans are, even in the face of trauma. Okay, I'll go back. And Lou said, I've noticed at certain points in my cycle, my thinking just accelerates, and it is generally low quality thinking, but it doesn't happen at other times. Why is that, if it's not to do with hormone fluctuations?
I'd say it is to do with hormone fluctuations. Like, we're not saying here that there isn't an effect. There is, like, it's funny, I was working with a young 12-year-old boy this morning, coaching him. And so I was trying to explain some ideas, obviously not about cycles, but some 3 principles ideas. And I asked him, what does it feel like when you're hungry? And we were talking about rumbly tummies, and I said, does a rumbly tummy mean that you're sick or that you're dying? He's like, no, it just means you need to have a sandwich. I'm like, exactly, right? That's the brain's way of letting you know you need to eat. And then we talked about other ways the body sends us signals, like when your eyelids get, heavy and you're like trying to stay awake, and you're like, he said, yeah, when your eyelids get heavy, it's a sign that you're supposed to go to sleep. And we talked about like when he plays football or soccer, as you guys call it, he gets hot and sweaty and he needs to take his hoodie off, right? So the sweat is his body letting him know that he's overheating. So is that right or wrong? No, it's just the way bodies work. And like I said, I remember when I had my monthly cycle, there were times when I would feel like my skull was too tight for my brain, I remember often feeling, and just that feeling of you know, agitation and frustration. It was there, even though you know, there might not be actually anything going on in my life. In fact, I always used to describe it as a magnifying glass. Those couple of days of the month were, you know, there were things where other times of the month I could just dealt with and got on with, you know, annoying people or, you know, a project or something. But on those couple of days of the month, it was like having a magnifying glass on it, and everything seemed more difficult and, you know, harder to handle. And what just came into my head was, I remember someone saying to me, maybe it's just an opportunity to act a little bit better. You know, this physical thing is going on with us. It's normal and natural. And instead of reacting to it, it's not fair, I can't believe this is happening, and screaming and shouting and throwing things, which is what I would wanted to do. But maybe it's an opportunity to act just a little bit better, hold my tongue, you know, not say that thing that I'm dying to say, or, you know, or leave the room, or whatever is, you know, and maybe, you know, with this understanding, if I can take this, my grounding into that experience, and at least know that it's going to pass, then I'm going to come through it much more, with much more grace and dignity. I always wanted to be a woman of grace and dignity. I don't know if I ever managed that when I was younger. Screaming and shouting more like. It's taken me a few decades to kind of get there. But now, you know, and also I do remember in my 30s, no, maybe in my late 20s, my cycle stopped altogether too. And it was really, I see now, it was a stress response. And I know it happens with athletes and ballerinas, for example. You know, if you put your body under a huge amount of stress, whether it's, you know, physical exercise or dieting, then the cycle is not going to work properly. And that was, looking back, that was probably a clue as to my mental state at the time. Only I was just sent to the hospital and told, you know, sent to the endocrine clinic, and they you know, told me that I might have difficulty ever conceiving children, which, you know, scared me and really was not helpful information. And then once I started eating and sleeping again properly, then it came back, which is something I'd want to stress with a lot of these things is, if you are having any difficulties, there's, unless there's something biologically wrong, which, you know, obviously you get checked by a doctor, but many of these situations, like Lily was saying, that can normalize again once we're sleeping properly. So I wouldn't say a hot flush is thinking, but my thinking about it is what is actually creating my experience. You can actually have a hot flush and be okay about it. I've experienced that. You can have pain and be okay with it. I'm not saying it's fun or, you know, skip around the room, but I actually put into the book a really interesting experience I had where I was talking to a client about this. And she said, and she's much more of a earth mother type than I am, but she said, for her, a hot flush was like a cleansing. And I thought, that's interesting. And I didn't have a hot flush for 2 weeks after that. And since then, I've had very few. They're very minor. I don't know what that was. I don't know how to explain that. I just know I had a shift in my perception and my thinking about it. And it changed. I don't say that's going to work for anybody, and I'm not suggesting it as a technique or anything like that. It's just that's what happened. It was weird. You know, as far as I can say.
It's just so interesting, I think, when we can get curious and see, like when you said, oh, this can be an opportunity to kind of do better, and I've just been blown away. I've been in the 3 principles conversation for about 5 years about, I just take a pause sometimes, and it's so cool, because your experience flows. And it's like, sometimes I'm in a much lower mood or I'm more irritated, but when I'm, you know, Dr. Pettit really did teach me, loss of contentment and irritability, it's an early love letter. It's an early signal. So if I'm irritated, it is just like, all right, you know, kind of, to just take a beat and let that flow. Or irritability, it might be a signal that maybe I do need to step away, because sometimes my boyfriend is the most lovely man and he sings and he's so happy. And sometimes I'm just in a mood and I'm like, shut the fuck up, like, and it's like, and then I know, oh, that's a tap on the shoulder. I'm taking life too seriously. And so either I'll just remove myself from the kitchen, or just take it as an opportunity to be kind to others, but to be kind to myself. And to, like, it's so cool when, it's simple but life-changing that our thoughts flow and then our experience flows. And so, even if I'm in a lower mood due to, whatever hormonal stuff, it's not even like a bad day. That too ebbs and flows. And I noticed that with pain. I had a very superficial, like, laser procedure on my face, and it hurt so much. Like, it was like the worst sunburn, but I would talk to clients, I would literally experience no pain. And the moment I would get off, I'd be like, oh my God, my face. And then I thought of you and I thought, isn't this so interesting? Isn't it interesting? I literally didn't feel it. And so I thought that I got curious of how could I experience this pain knowing that when I was engaged and present, I didn't feel it. So it was almost like, I don't know, I could have a lightness about it. And it's the same thing, whether it's a mood or a pain. And even when it's really like I tweaked my shoulder working out, or I got a laser, like that is really in a way where, but we can experience with, it's kind of like we're free to experience it. It's not good or bad, but when you can kind of, I think to me, it's like an opportunity to flow through your experience. And Sid Banks said that the only thing, if people learned, was not to fear their experience. And we can fear it when it is a hot flush or a mood. It's because we think, how long is it going to last? And what did I do to get myself here? And then we start revving up our thinking, when if we, to me, just can stay present, and we might then have a true insight about something to do. If there is something to do that might be soothing, mentally or physically, but we don't need to like think our way there. And in fact, it's kind of the opposite. And that's what I've seen, whether it's, a physical illness, a shift in hormones, that I'm not going to try to solve it with my intellect, more get quiet and let my wisdom kind of break through, because it's always waiting there and sometimes it's just, oh, there's nothing to do, and that's okay.
Yeah. Beautiful.
I've heard some people in the sharing in the comments like, wow, this explanation really helped it all click for me. And then Lou said, I just had an insight about fertility when you said your body knew it wasn't healthy. Can really see this now. And Christy was also talking about trauma and how when you were sharing all of that, well, maybe I'll read Christy's comment and then I know there's a question. But Christy said, I've had a lot of trauma from the ages of 6 to 17 and then 18 to 24. I never thought that trauma would have an effect on my cycle, but the way you broke it down made sense. There has been times when my cycle is so bad than other months, but then again, the months when it's bad, I'm highly stressed out. Every year for my physical, I would have my doctor run all these blood tests on me to make sure my hormones were good, because I always thought they were off balance, or maybe I was going through early premenopause, but they always came back good. So this makes a lot of sense.
I just want to say something about the fertility thing, because and trauma kind of it's funny how they say trauma's behind obesity, it's behind alcoholism, it's behind it's like the trauma informed therapy is like a very in thing these days, and I just see it now as one of my favorite quotes from Sid about this was, if you going into the past from a low mood is psychological suicide. These things have happened to us, and some of these things are horrendous and tragic. But if I go back into the past thinking from a low mood and think about it, I'm crying, you're crying, it's a disaster. Whereas I can think about the past now from a better state of mind, and I can think about it with understanding, even compassion for myself and even the people who hurt me. And one of the things I learned about fertility is that when our brain thinks that we're in a crisis, it, as well as, when it goes into fight or flight, as well as putting oxygen and blood into our large muscles so we can defend ourselves and survive, it also shuts down things. And it's very much an efficiency thing. And I love efficiency, right? Being, the perfectionist kind of thinker. What it does is, for example, it shuts down digestion. Because if you're running for your life, then digesting lunch is not necessary. And that's why, forgive me for being graphic, but that's often why we pee or poop ourselves when we're really terrified, because the body, it wants to, be as light as possible to make a quick getaway. So having a bladder sloshing around is not going to be useful if you're running from that tiger. So it shuts down digestion. And that's why a lot of us get digestive problems, is because then we get hungry and we eat something, and you put some food into a digestive system that's shut down and it hasn't got the right enzymes, or it's not doing the right movements. There's going to be bloating and pain, and things aren't going to be working properly. It's also true of fertility, because if you're running for your life, then making babies is a luxury. And so the brain will shut down our fertility system, our reproductive organs. And I think it happens for men as well, as it's not just women. But because if we're in survival mode, then having a baby would not be a good idea. And that's, that's wisdom, I think. That's wisdom in action. And I can see now why it made perfect sense that I was not having my period when I was in my worst, PTSD stress moments, because, would that have been a good time to have a baby? No, it really wouldn't. I couldn't take care of myself, let alone, another human being. And I think that's why a lot of women have fertility problems. And once you start having a fertility problem, it creates more stress and more pressure. And then the body really doesn't want to work efficiently. And it starts creating more problems. Now, obviously, there can be some mechanical problems. I'm not saying this is the answer for everything. And please get checked by a doctor. But as happened with me and Lily, when we started to get better and take care of ourselves better, those things went away. And so I think it's really freeing to understand this stuff. Then we're not a victim of our bodies. We're not a victim of our cycle, or a victim of, of being a woman even. I think one of the reasons I put a lot of history into the book as well is because there's, historically women's bodies have been seen as malfunctioning, messy. What was the one of them I put, like, it's like a man's body turned inside out, or outside of one of those Plato guys made that crazy statement. And so this idea that there's a malfunction and a hormone imbalance, that's really something that we've kind of inherited. And I think one of the great things about, conversations like this, is that to see that you're not alone. We all go through these things, that it's normal and natural. And doesn't have to be such a big deal, and we don't have to rush off to doctors and get supplements and treatments to when understanding what is happening can be enough to calm down the nervous system, and we can get back to our innate well-being.
Yeah, I love that. And then I think also when the 3 principles conversation, we talk about, we understand how humans work best, that nobody feels good when we're taking our low mood thinking seriously, and when we have a noisy head, when we have chronic stress, because then it's so innocent. But I work with people, and sometimes they say, oh, I have these panic attacks out of the blue and it's so scary. And then when you actually say, oh, did something happen? They'll say, oh yeah, my husband lost his job, and so I'm taking this, and I'm taking really seriously, and we're selling our home, and all these things. And you can see why, and it's there's no blame, it's innocent. But when we start taking life seriously, and I know I keep saying Dr. Petta, but was one of my real, I think, first teachers of the principles, to just do such a deep dive. And I think, because he kept pointing me back to Sid, life is too important to take seriously. And when we can, I could go on and on, but then you can understand what's happening, and then understanding the human experience. Because I think when it's hormonal or anxiety or physical, we can take it so personally. And we can say, what am I doing wrong? I can't believe this is happening to me. And what I love the principles, we don't take it so personally. We understand the human experience. Oh, I'm a human. I'm not doing anything wrong. But these are some things when humans feel good, and so when you can notice it, you're not thinking about yourself so much if you're in a low mood. And that's why I love when we have a community conversation. Oh, this happens to a lot of women. And I don't have to think, oh, what's wrong? I don't have to get in my head, but I can settle down and it just was life-changing to me, all about that, because I used to really feel broken when it came to that fertility stuff. I felt so alone. And I was like, what's happening to me? And then whether it was anxiety or panic or food and body. But somebody asked a question with Sarah, which is such a great question, because she said, how about dealing with a foggy brain? It could be caused by something you ate or hormones. So she said, so don't fear it. And before I pass it on to you, I thought I actually experienced brain fog, but I didn't know that's what it was. So I had COVID about, I guess, a little more than a year and a half ago. And I also have diabetes. So before I had COVID, my diabetes, I have late onset type 1, which is when you do require hormones oftentimes. But so before, I kind of was in a honeymoon period with diabetes. I didn't need to use insulin if I kind of ate in a low carb way, and I love exercise. And then I got diabetes. I got COVID. And it just really kind of knocked it all out. But I was very sick with my blood sugar. And so I felt weird in my brain, but I kind of chalked it up to diabetes. And then I didn't realize later it was brain fog, but I kind of loved it, and that it was brain fog for me. I never researched anything about COVID because I know I can get in my own way. So I never looked at symptoms. I never read any articles. I never wanted to know anything about long COVID. So I just kind of flowed through this experience. And I used to look at, people like Dick and Bettinger and the principles, and he would talk so slow. And I've actually slowed down a little bit, but this was about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years. And so I went to run my group, and I was so slow, and I would forget words. But I think because I'm often revved up, I was like, I kind of felt like Christy from Three's Company. Like I felt dumb, but I didn't mind it. I flowed through it. And then it wasn't until I popped back out, and then people would talk about brain fog and a foggy brain. And I was like, that was what I experienced. And even with the fact that my diabetes is in a different place, this was what I always feared. I never wanted this to happen. And it's fine. It's also, now I get to eat more because I have to use insulin. So it was so funny because when I was experiencing COVID, I kept remembering something that somebody said, that health isn't bad or good, it's an opportunity. And I thought, and I'm not saying that's true, or, people might be in very poor health. What is this? But it kept coming through for me. And when I had COVID, it was a very real opportunity for me to rest. And I'm not saying this to fear COVID, because it was just my experience. My health has been permanently changed just because of diabetes, but it's honestly not good or bad. And I never would have thought that if it wasn't for the principles, because somebody said, but now you have to use insulin. But who's to say that's good or bad? And it honestly, I'm not even just saying that as like lip service. It has given me a new opportunity to have a different relationship with food than I had before. And it was, I don't know. So that was a thing of foggy brain. I know that was kind of a tangent, but this conversation to me is just so life-changing, because we can really have a health condition. And one final thing, and then I'll be quiet. I'd said something, she said, but you say we're not broken. And she's like, I have a real health condition. So how can you say that? And to me, what we're talking about, and what Sid pointed us to, is this human spirit, and there's a part of us that's never broken. So yeah, I have diabetes. Like my pancreas does not work probably as well as any of you on this call. I don't feel broken though. It doesn't mean that I don't have health consideration. And there's times, when I have to, I just probably take care of myself in different ways, but I don't know. So when we talk about broken, to me, there's just that deeper part that's just untouched, but I don't know. I'll pass it on to you, Hannah, in terms of foggy brain or anything that I said as well. But to Sarah's question, you know, foggy brain, could it be caused by something you eat or hormones? So what do we do? Do we not fear it?
Yeah, all of the above. I have a friend who, when she eats, she can feel things when she eats something. Oh, that really affected me, or, you know, this is really heavy in my stomach, or this. The only thing I feel is like caffeine. If I've been caffeine free for 30 something years, more than 30, 34 years, I don't know, something like that. And if I accidentally had a cup of tea that was, you know, had some caffeine in it, I can feel it in my brain, and it's got nothing to do with thinking. It's just something, you know, like I can, like poison sounds very dramatic, but I can feel there's something alien in my system if I have caffeine after so long of not having it. So I had terrible brain fog when I was going through perimenopause. I can remember, you know, and some of it's kind of funny when you find mayonnaise in the freezer, or, you know, like, you know, things like that. You know, it's kind of, or how did I get here? Like, you know, you're walking in the other room and you did, I cannot remember what. And I went through a phase, when you were talking, I just remembered a phase about a year or so ago where when I was coaching and leading groups like this, like I do book clubs and all kinds of things, where I could not remember what the question was, I'd even start sentences and I didn't have a clue how I was going to even finish the sentence. That's how, you know, foggy my brain was at the time. And I learned to kind of enjoy it, kind of like an adventure. Because, you know, it can be scary. Like, you know, we can go off into, you know, am I getting Alzheimer's? Is it dementia? You know, and then you start Googling, and my aunt died of Alzheimer's. Maybe I'm gonna, you know, you could, like, I know my thinking could go downhill if I really wanted to with any of this stuff. But kind of like what you were saying about the tap on the shoulder, I know now that if my thinking speeds up, if it gets speedy, or I feel tempted to Google something in a bad way, not a helpful thing. And I actually remember asking Bill this question. I was kind of concerned about my memory, because having had several, you know, quite severe head injuries, and wondering if that was going to have a long-term effect. You know, am I experiencing, you know, is this menopause or is it dementia? And he was, you know, how sweet he is. He said, I know for me that my memory doesn't work as well when I'm stressed. And that's all I needed to know. Like in a state of stress, our memories are gonna not work as well. We're gonna feel pain at a much more intense level. Our nervous systems are gonna get more reactive. All of this comes back to state of mind, I think. And then to your point about form and being broken, I had a huge insight about this, kind of like what you were pointing to, about how when I get caught up in the world of form, meaning pain and anxiety and thinking and Googling and working things out, that's all an illusion. And I could quite easily feel broken in that place, because things aren't working out the way I want them to, or, you know, I made a mistake, or, you know, it's very heavy. But when I was talking earlier about formless energy, you know, passing through our minds, what I see now is that's who we really are. That innate well-being we often talk about is that formless energy before it's taken a form in my little pea brain. And formless can't be broken. Like, you can't break a cloud. I mean, I guess they could separate, but, you know, it's like, you can't, it's not broken. It's just taken a different form. I could take, you know, my cup and drop it on the floor, and the glass will break because it has a form. But can you break the water inside of it? No, I don't think so. I'm not a physicist, I don't know. But when I saw that, that's why I can confidently say to anybody that I'm not broken, you cannot be broken, is because we're talking about that formless energy before thought. That formless energy that is infinite and creative and loving and kind and full of wisdom and resilience. That's who we really are. And that's where we get back in touch with when the illusion of the stinky thinking falls away. And I think that's the great news that Lily and I are both pointing to, is that we are innately well, despite what our bodies are doing, you know, in whatever my body is doing, even my brain, there is an innate well-being there that can never be touched, can never be broken. And that is, I mean, that's a hope that I love to share with people.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Can you tell people, maybe hold up the book again, tell people where they can buy it, where they can find you? There it is, very well.
There it is. It's funny. I didn't get a copy of it until like about a month after everybody else had seen it, because you know, I live in Israel and it was taking ages to get here. So it's called Very Well, a novel about hormones, women, and why Freud was wrong. We didn't touch much on Freud today, but I'm happy to get into that conversation anytime. And it's on Amazon. So you can either put in my name or the title of the book. And yeah, it's on Amazon. You know, it was Amazon #1 bestseller for a day in the Freud section. I'll take that win. Thanks to, you know, Amazon's algorithms that kind of put it in the Freud section. I beat Freud at the complete works, you know, and his interpretation of dreams. I beat him for a whole day. Which is, I think the irony is pretty funny to me. But yeah, I've got a website. My website is chanastudley.com, and you can find me on Facebook. And Lily, let's tell us where we can find you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Well, yes. My website is Peace From Within, but there's dashes. So it's peace-from-within.com. But I'm very active on social media. That's kind of like an art form for me. I've realized it's very fun. I love making videos. I get in my head when I write. And so I'm on social media, on TikTok, just at Peace From Within. And then on Instagram, there's an _, Peace From Within. And if you're there, there's all my links. And as I said, it's a joy for me to share and then to connect with people. And so thank you everybody for coming.
Yeah. Thank you, Lily, for hosting this. It's been such a pleasure. It's so nice to hang out with you again and share these ideas. You do such an amazing work. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. So do you. I'm just inspired, and I'm so happy that we've been able to connect and make friends. And your books are just a gift. And as are you, your work, your gifts, your understanding. To me, it's just like up there with Sid, you know, just really a gift.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for coming. It's so nice to meet some new friends and see you all. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah.
Yes,
great.
thank you. It makes it so fun when people come and we get to see everybody. So thank you all. It was so lovely.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.